Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here, and I have an update for you on the bill that's been slowly making its way through the House of Commons that includes the $1,200 increase to the Canada Child Benefit for children under the age of 6, as well as the pause on student loan interest for all federal student loans. Now, this was introduced into the House of Commons way back at the end of November, and it's been slowly working its way through the process, but some things have happened recently that may make this more likely to pass rather soon. So in today's video, we're going to talk about all of the steps this bill has already been through, where it currently is, and how likely it is to be passed through the rest of the legislative process so that this can actually come into force and these changes can be made official. But before we do, make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts. It seems these days the only person that you can rely on when it comes to your personal finance is yourself, so I'd really recommend taking a look at those. All right, let's dive in. All right, so we've used this chart a couple times before to explain where this legislation actually is in the process and how many steps are left to go through. So we've already completed this. We've had our introduction and first reading, and that happened way back on, I believe, November 29th. Now, there was a big delay here between when this initial step, this first reading, was finished and the second reading was held, and that was held on March 8th. So the beginning of March is when this second reading was held, and that was successfully completed, and this was then referred to a committee. Now, inside of this consideration in committee phase, that's where they go over line by line every single clause inside the bill, and they talk to various stakeholders and various people that may have differing opinions on whether or not this bill is actually a good thing. Now, after they've heard all of that testimony from various witnesses, they will decide whether or not they want to propose any amendments to the bill in order to try to change this. Now, if they provide any amendments, this goes back to the House of Commons where they debate it and decide whether or not they accept these amendments in the third reading. So this bill was then referred to the Committee on Finance, and they had 4 different meetings covering all of these topics. They met on Thursday, March 11th, March 17th, March 18th, March 23rd, and like I said, they talked to various different witnesses or different stakeholders. So they talked to the C.D. Howe Institute, they do lots of research, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, Carleton University. They're touching on all of these different categories of people and organizations that may have varying opinions. Now, they've finally come back with a result at the end of this committee phase. Let me show you. This is the final report that was submitted by this finance committee, and it will be viewed in the House of Commons eventually. And it says that in accordance with its order of reference on Monday, March 8th, 2021, your committee has considered Bill C-14, that's the full name of the bill, and agreed on Tuesday, March 23rd to report it without amendment. That means they didn't decide to make any changes even after talking to all of those various stakeholders. Now, if you're voting for or you're rooting for the fast passage of this bill, this is a good thing to hear. Because of the fact that this bill is being referred back to the House of Commons with no amendment, that means that the bill that the House of Commons is going to see in the third reading section of the legislative process is going to be the exact same as the time they saw it on the second reading. That means it's far less likely that there will be any debate or any points to bring up that will be heavily debated and potentially delayed longer. If there were any amendments included in this, they would have to go through the House of Commons process of debating all of that and deciding whether or not they were actually going to adopt this bill in third reading. So that means even though it took months, all of these have been completed successfully. They've made it through all of these steps, and now all that's essentially left is the third reading and adoption and the consideration and passage by the Senate, which will then mean that it receives royal assent and it will then come into force or be made a reality. This is the official calendar for when things are actually happening in the House of Commons. You'll notice all of these green dates with the green squares on them on the calendar. Those are days in which the MPs are actually sitting in the House of Commons, actually conducting government business and voting on things and passing motions. These are the only days that they are in session and sitting in the House of Commons. So you'll notice right now, as of right now, when I'm filming this, it is the 30th of March, so there will be no House of Commons sitting today, but there also won't be any next week at the beginning of April, and the first day that they will actually be sitting again as of now is April 12th. Now, this is the first day that this bill could possibly be discussed in third reading, but there, of course, is a chance that it may not happen on this first day because the House of Commons schedule is packed with a whole bunch of other bills as well right now. But even if it's not discussed on April 12th on that first day back, it's very likely that in the next little block of sittings here, we're definitely going to see this at the very least discussed at third reading. You'll see there's 5 weeks right here of time where they're sitting every single weekday. So if it's not discussed in there, I would really question how serious they were about getting this passed. Now, there are some roadblocks that they could run into at third reading, but let me show you what those are. Once the committee reports that, hey, we didn't make any amendments, you can can take a look at this. It's the exact same as the last time you saw it. They're going to debate it at third reading. Now, it's likely that because they were able to pass it at second reading, that they'll also pass it at third because it's the exact same text. But there is a little bit of a controversial thing that's included inside of this bill that doesn't have anything to do with the Canada Child Benefit or the interest relief for students. No, it has to do with the spending of the government and increasing those limits. Now, if there's anything that I could see a political party like the Conservatives push back on, it would be this clause inside of the bill. This is in the final section of the bill, and it's gone rather unnoticed, at least by the media, but I believe that people in the House of Commons have discussed this at least a little bit. And let me explain what it is. It has to do with the Borrowing Authority Act. This essentially controls how much the government is able to borrow in order to implement its programs. Now, as of right now, that's set around $1.1 trillion. Now, inside of this bill, they're looking to make a change here to boost that up to $1.8 trillion. So that's a significant increase in the amount of money the government would technically be allowed to borrow. Of course, they've spent so much money during this pandemic, so of course they're going to need to borrow a little bit more, but this would increase this number by around $700 billion, if I get my math right. So of course, that is a big change that's included in this bill, and it's likely one of the reasons that it's taken so long to work its way through the House of Commons, because instead of just including these small supports in individual bills that may be easier to pass, there was actually also this other change fit into it as well. So if there's any sort of clause that people could have issue with, it would likely be this one, but we're going to find out when they hold this third reading in the House of Commons. Now, after that third reading, if they're able to adopt that, then it will be passed on to the Senate, in which case they'll debate it and then they'll have to adopt it. And once that happens, that's when this bill has actually become official and passed through all stages. It'll receive royal assent, and you can expect these changes to actually occur. And here's the Senate sitting schedule. You'll remember that we said the earliest time that the House of Commons could take a look at this for third reading is on April 12th, which means the earliest time that the Senate could receive this bill and start debating it is on April 19th. So what you can take away from this is that the earliest that this bill could possibly be passed through all stages would be the week of April 19th. But of course, if it runs into any roadblocks, that could be significantly later. But hopefully this video has helped give you a better idea of where this bill C-14, the increase for the CCB, as well as the interest relief for students, hopefully this is giving you a better idea of how close that is to actually being passed, when you might see it, and what's actually going on. Because of course, for these sort of minute things, the smaller things that are happening in the House of Commons, it's not always covered on the news. So hopefully by seeing it here, you can at least take a little bit of solace that it is making some slow progress. And of course, make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.